Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another EP video. The 2024 Electoral College map is shaping up to be one of the narrowest in presidential election history. As I discussed in yesterday's video, which you can check out by clicking the top right link, as few as 6 key battlegrounds are likely to receive more attention in the lead up to Election Day by both candidates and the media than any of the other 44 states combined. So before they all get the attention over the next year and a half, let's discuss which states currently considered to be firmly entrenched in either party's column are most likely to turn into swing states over the next 2 decades. In other words, which of the solidly blue and red states on this map are most likely to end up in the purple toss-up column 20 years from now. Before we begin this analysis, please make sure to check out my official forecast website at electionpredictionsofficial.com. It'll be the first link in the description and comment section down below, and updated weekly you will see how the 2024 presidential election is taking shape, based on polling data, voting history, shifts and trends, socio-demographic data, and prediction markets. I will be using this website in a lot of my videos going forward, so feel free to bookmark it or at least remember electionpredictionsofficial.com so you can follow along. Alrighty, let's start with a little bit of context. As recently as 1988, just 8 election cycles ago, California voted Republican for the 6th consecutive presidential election. Meanwhile, West Virginia voted Democratic in 1988, 1992, and 1996. Yes, the same West Virginia that had just voted for Donald Trump by 40 percentage points in 2020. More recently, Democrat Barack Obama carried Iowa and Ohio by more than 5 percentage points in 2012. Both states are now practically off the board for Democratic presidential candidates just 1 decade later, as Trump won them by 8 points both in 2016 and 2020. On the flip side, Republican Mitt Romney carried Georgia and Arizona by nearly double-digit margins in 2012, and Joe Biden just won both of these Sunbelt states here in 2020. Now, oftentimes, swing states, or battlegrounds, are characterized as those either with a small margin of victory for either party from election to election, that being typically below 3 or 5 percentage points, or those that literally swing from voting for a Republican or Democratic candidate over time. In our current political environment, the states that voted for current Democratic President Joe Biden in 2020 and former President Donald Trump in 2016 are most often highlighted as swing states. These include Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. As I said though, tight margins in races also indicate that a state could have been won by either party. In 2020, 7 states were won by a margin of 3 percentage points or less. These include the 5 aforementioned swing states, in addition to North Carolina and Nevada. Of the past 8 presidential elections, the 1992 election had the highest number of states that switched political parties, with 22 states that flipped from the previous election. This is why 1992 is often cited as a year of political realignment, where Bill Clinton's defeat of George H.W. Bush turned many states that had historically voted Republican, including California, Colorado, Maryland, and many others, into states that we now consider reliably Democratic. And since the 1992 election, 26 states, as pictured here, were won by less than a 3-point margin in at least one election. This includes Florida and Nevada, which had such tight margins in 5 of the last 8 elections, as well as Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and New Hampshire, which were decided by less than 3% in 4 of those elections. Now, of course, the purpose of this video is to identify which states that have not recently been considered swing states will become competitive over the next couple decades. While it is true that our current electoral college map has been as static as ever in American history, It's still completely reasonable to assume that at least a couple of states that have voted either Republican or Democrat by massive margins in the last couple elections will see some sort of trend or shift into competitiveness. Don't believe me? Take a look here as I cycle through the last 8 elections dating back to 1988. The states colored in pink were decided by less than 3% in that year's election. You can see Washington and Illinois here in 1988. Republican presidential candidates have not targeted either of these now safely Democratic states in over a decade. Moving 4 years ahead to 1992, you see both Montana and New Jersey. Yeah, 1996, Kentucky and Tennessee. They recently voted for Trump by over 23 points in 2020. Now, once we get to 2000, you start to see maps a lot more similar to what we've come to expect nowadays. But even in 2008, you see Montana, Missouri, and Indiana. Obama won Missouri and Indiana in this election. Both are now safely Republican. 2012, 2016, we talked about Ohio and Iowa's trend, and then here we are in 2020. Now, in order to truly try and identify some wildcard swing state newcomers, we have to focus in on the states that have not been considered battlegrounds in recent memory. Since the 1988 election, 20 states and Washington, D.C. have voted for the same party in every presidential election. Of these 20 states, only 3, Minnesota in 2016 and 2000, Oregon in 2000, and Washington in 1988 have ever had close elections, defined by being less than 3% a margin of victory. As you can see here, of those 20 states, 7 and Washington, D.C. have consistently voted for the Democratic presidential candidate since 1988, and 13 have consistently voted for the Republican presidential candidate. While there was some speculation that Texas was becoming a swing state in 2020, the margin between the Republican and Democratic vote was still 5.5 percentage points. An additional 8 states switched party realignment from 1988 to 1992 and have voted for the same party in every election since, those being California, Connecticut, Delaware, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, New Jersey, and Vermont. So in effect, that gives us 28 states on this map here to choose from. Now, the first route that we could go down is simply pick from the closest races in 2020. The partisan lean of Minnesota, for example, is only around 3 points towards Democrats, and Trump came within 1.5 points of breaking the Democrats' 10-election win streak in 2016. And if the political environment moves towards Republicans as early as 2024, Minnesota could potentially be up for grabs for Trump or whoever the Republican nominee may be. It's also easy to see how further degradation among Democratic support with the white working class could help flip it. But that being said, Minnesota moved back towards Biden and Democrats by 5.5 points in 2020. And when I first came up with the idea for this video, I didn't want to go down this easy route either. Rather, if I am picking a true sleeper swing state currently on the Republican side, my money is on Alaska or Utah. Alaska's use of ranked choice voting has highlighted a potential ideological shift in the state, where moderate Democrats are increasingly favored. Mary Peltola, for example, the Democratic representative who won both the special and general election for Alaska's lone congressional district last year, is sometimes called a pro-guns, pro-fish Democrat for her pro-gun and pro-conservation stances that made her popular among moderate Republicans opposed to Sarah Palin's Trump-backed candidacy. Trump himself only won Alaska by 10 points in 2020, down 5 points from his 2016 margin, and the state's margin has gotten increasingly less Republican in recent presidential elections. In fact, since Ronald Reagan carried the state by 37 points in 1984, Democrats have increasingly received a higher share of the presidential vote than the previous election on 6 occasions. In the lead up to Election Day, 538's polling average had Trump leading by less than 8 points. Joe Biden also became the first Democrat to win in Anchorage, Alaska's largest city, since 1964. And furthermore, nationwide exit polling conducted by Edison Research showed Trump winning the support of veterans in Alaska over Biden by just 10 points, a major decline from 2016 when he led Hillary Clinton by 26 points among this key demographic group in the state. And finally, as of the 2020 election, 58% of voters were either registered as unaffiliated, undeclared, or independent, the highest proportion of any state. Now, all of that being said, Alaska is inherently a politically unique state. And while all of the signs point towards it being potentially in play for Democrats down the road, I wouldn't be shocked if it pulled a reverse 360 and started trending back in favor of Republicans. It is perhaps the least predictable state in the union. And on the topic of political uniqueness, I have picked the state of Utah in large part because of the severe aversion to Trump and Trumpism among the state's Republican voter base. In the 2016 presidential election, independent candidate Evan McMullin was able to win 22% of the vote in Utah. Trump is the only Republican candidate since 1964 not to win at least 50% of the vote in the state. In 2018, Utah voters elected Trump skeptic Mitt Romney to the Senate, and then McMullin won 43% of the vote against incumbent Senator Mike Lee in 2022. All of this begs the question of how much the state is really going to continue to shift to the left after Trump leaves the political stage. It is a notably urban state, at least relatively speaking. In fact, it is the most urban state to vote for Trump by more than 10 percentage points, and even ranks ahead of 7 states that Biden won in 2020. That matters because the political divide between urban and rural Americans is growing. And statistically speaking, the more urban a state is, the more likely it is to vote Democratic. According to 538, the 4 most urban states are New York, New Jersey, California, and Massachusetts, and they're some of the deepest blue states in the country. Meanwhile, the 3 most rural states, Wyoming, Montana, and South Dakota, are deeply Republican. Back in 2016, 10 of the 13 most urban states in the country voted for Hillary Clinton, while 12 of the 14 most rural states voted for Trump. The only exceptions were the fairly urbanized states of Florida, Arizona, and Texas, which all went for Trump, and the more rural states of Vermont and Maine, which cast their ballots for Clinton. Fast forward to 2020, though, Joe Biden won 15 of the 17 most urbanized states in the U.S., with the only exceptions being Florida and Texas, which voted for Trump by just 3 and 6%, respectively. And on that note, back in 2020, 538 created a hypothetical scenario in which the 2020 presidential election results were based on the relationship between their urbanization index and 2016's results. And here is what the map would have looked like. And when you really look at it, it doesn't look that off. After all, this is one way in which American politics are trending. And sure enough, here is Utah colored in blue. Now, if Utah fits the bill as a state on the Republican side that could trend towards Democrats due to its urbanization, then the natural argument on the other side would be that Vermont and Maine, which rank as the 5th and 7th most rural states, respectively, may trend towards Republicans. But that's where the other major trend in American politics comes into play: the educational divide. Vermont checks in as the 4th most educated state in the country, based on proportion of its population with a bachelor's degree, while Maine also ranks in the top 20. Why does this matter? Well, the gap between partisan affiliations of those with and without college degrees accelerated exponentially in the Trump era. All the way back in 1960, Democrat John F. Kennedy lost college-educated voters by a 2-to-1 margin, yet won the presidency thanks to overwhelming support among white voters without a degree. 60 years later, Joe Biden lost non-college educated whites by a 2-to-1 margin in 2020, while securing 60% of the college-educated vote. Biden won 18 of the 19 most educated states in the country, while Trump won 15 of the 17 least educated states. Meanwhile, Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, and North Carolina, some of the closest races in 2020, all rank right smack in the middle between 23rd and 34th in education. Also, following the 2022 midterm elections, Democrats now control 3/4 of the most highly educated congressional districts, while Republicans control 2/3 of the least educated. Because of this strengthening trend, it's hard to see Vermont and Maine shifting towards Republicans anytime soon. But you may also notice, looking at this table, Utah has the 14th most educated population in the United States, by far the highest ranking of any Trump state, the next closest being 21st ranked Kansas. So, based on this data, is there a current Democratic state that is both less urban and less educated than its peers, and could I see it taking the political red pill over the next decade or so? Well, the first state that comes to mind here is actually New Mexico, even though we crossed it off of our list because it has recently been somewhat competitive and voted Republican as recently as 2004. It does rank as the 12th least educated state in the country, the lowest of any Biden state besides swing state Nevada, and is the 15th most rural, which ranks right behind Vermont and Maine among the least urban Democratic states. New Mexico's trend has been relatively flat since 2004. Democratic presidential candidates have won it 4 straight times, and the results were about 6 to 8 points to the left of wherever the nation was. On another note, it is also the only majority Hispanic state in the US, and if Republicans keep making inroads with Hispanic voters, that could potentially make up their deficit. But all of that being said, the point of this video was to name a solidly blue state that has not recently been competitive, and I'd feel like I'm letting you down if I just stick with New Mexico. I suppose generally speaking, it is harder to find a deep blue state that will move to the right than a deep red state that will move left, whereas it's easier to identify battlegrounds that'll move to the right, like Wisconsin, Nevada, and Virginia. But if I had to pick, I would lean towards taking Oregon. Hillary Clinton won it by just 11 points in 2016, and the state ranks much closer to the middle of the pack, both in urbanization and college education, than other deep blue states. The last time an election for governor in Oregon was decided by double digits was 1988, and despite Democratic gains up and down the West Coast, Oregon's trend has mostly flatlined, with the Democratic Party unable to clear the 11 to 16 point margin of victory range in 4 consecutive election cycles. That is all for today's video though. Let me know what other videos you would like to see in the future. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video down below if you did, and subscribe while you're at it. You can check out more content from my channel here, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. EP out.